I'm Chaplain John Bravinder. What do you do when you're facing difficult circumstances in life and you need to press through to the other side? What brings you inspiration? I think for me, historical figures is one source of inspiration in my life. And one such person is Viktor Frankl. He was born in 1905 in Vienna, Austria. And he grew up a middle child in a middle-class family. His parents both worked for the government. And he had a comfortable upbringing, but then World War I set in, and as a result, they lost their jobs. They were destitute in a lot of different areas of life, and so they needed to actually forage for food by walking through farms in Austria. And life became very difficult for the Frankl family, but he had an aptitude and a desire for psychiatry, and eventually went to school at the University of Vienna and was at the medical school there and had a passion to help students who were struggling with suicide in Austria. What he'd noticed is there was a trend, and as grades were given out by teachers, there was a spike in the suicide rate because students were so fixated on achieving their expectations, and when they experienced disappointments, it was just too much for them, and so they took their own life. And Viktor Frankl came up with a method, a pattern of helping treat those high school students with a learning that he had come up with, and that is for people to have meaning, purpose, and significance in life's darkest days. And so he applied that learning to the high school students, and the very following year, there were no suicides amongst high school students in Austria during that time. And so he continued to refine his learning and his understanding and research, and eventually he served in the department of the University of Vienna, Department of Neurology, and from 1933 to 1937. And then his world changed again in 1938 when Germany invaded Austria. And he was obviously concerned for himself, for his family, because he was hearing more and more stories of people who were being arrested by the SS, by Nazis, and they were being thrown into concentration camps. He applied at one point for a U.S. visa, and his lottery number got picked, and he had the opportunity to escape what was happening in Europe and flee to the U.S. But when he was visiting his parents' house, he saw a fragment, a marble fragment of the Ten Commandments that was, a monument that was at the synagogue in which he worshipped, he and his family worshipped, because he was Jewish. And the Nazis came in, burned the synagogue down, but his father was able to recover a fragment of that monument and brought it home. And it was actually a letter from the Fifth Commandment, which says, honor thy father and mother. And when he read that and he saw that, he immediately had a sign that he was not to flee because he needed to stay close to his parents, stay close to his family, and endure whatever hardship would befall them. And so he continued to practice. He was named the chair of the Department of Neurology at Rothschild Hospital, and he continued to help people who were dealing with depression and anxiety and suicide. And in 1941, he married his wife Tilly, but eventually the impending doom would happen to the family, and they were all arrested by the SS, and they were thrown into concentration camps. So his older brother Walter, both his parents, Viktor Frankl, his wife Tilly, the only one to escape to Australia was his sister. But they went to Czechoslovakia into concentration camps, and it was Frankl and his family who were moved around to a variety of concentration camps from 1942 to 1945. Frankl actually was imprisoned at 4 different camps. Eventually, he was sent to Auschwitz. What he discovered in that moment was the despair and the level of discouragement and despondency that prisoners had once he arrived. Actually, when he walked into the gate at Auschwitz, there was a long line with a guard at the very front of the line. And the guard was evaluating who would be the stronger prisoners to work in the labor camps and what prisoners would be too weak or diseased, and they were sent to the gas chambers and the crematoriums. And so when Frankl actually got to the front of the line, the soldier determined that he was a little bit too frail and weak to work in the labor camps, and so he told him to get in the left line and be sent to the crematoriums. But he refused. He got into the right line and he was sent to the huts, and it was there that a typical hut would hold about 250 people, but they were cramming 1,500 people into huts, and so people had to squat, people had to, the only way that they could sleep was to lay on their side because they were so closely crammed together in the hut. And he served in the labor camp. His wife, Tilly, they were separated, but she volunteered to go to Auschwitz just so that she could be in the same camp with her husband. So it was in that period of time when he noticed just how many people became discouraged and overwhelmed by life's challenges, and they gave up on living. And so he noticed this trend for people is that he could actually see the signs of when discouragement overwhelmed people and they either stopped eating their 5-ounce bread ration that they were given, or they stopped eating their 1 cup of soup that they were given, which contained mostly broth, and they gave up and they stopped having a desire to continue. And it was understandable, because they would look over to the other side of the camp and they would see the plume of smoke from the crematoriums, or they would see people being marched into the gas chambers, and they would realize that if they became too weak, that was their fate. So suicide was actually a component that people had to deal with within the concentration camps. There were prisoners who would give up and they would walk toward the electrified fence. They would grab onto it with both hands. It was called holding onto the wire. And when Frankl first walked into Auschwitz, he made a commitment to himself that he would not hold onto the wire. And so he helped prisoners to cope with the struggle and the ordeal that they were facing. And he did that by allowing them to focus on positive experiences and to focus on positive relationships in their life, to take the next step, the next 24 hours in life, and to endure whatever life would befall them so that they could stay together and eventually be freed, hopefully, from the prison camp. He actually remembers walking tens of miles to the labor camp where he was participating in forced labor, and he just did a little mental exercise by focusing on what a conversation with his wife would be like upon release from Auschwitz. And he went into a kind of a mental place where he focused on what that great experience would be like, and that kind of helped him endure that day. There were people who were just completely overwhelmed, and when they became overwhelmed, he was the one to actually institute what was called a suicide watch. And it was people surrounding those who were discouraged, bringing hope and meaning and talking about maybe how their life could have purpose in the midst of their circumstances. 1.3 million people walked through the gates of Auschwitz. 1.1 million were killed. Viktor Frankl was one of the 200,000 that survived. In 1945, when the Allied armies liberated Europe, the gates were opened and the prisoners could experience freedom. When he walked out of the gate, he discovered the news of the fate of his family. His father had died of disease 6 months after being sent to a concentration camp. His mother was sent to a gas chamber. His brother had died as well. And his wife, Tilly, upon the release of all the camps, there was a stampede of people running to the gates to, reclaim their freedom, and she was trampled to death. So it was at that moment that he had lost everything. And he talked about these experiences in his book. It's called Man's Search for Meaning, and it's a book that was written in 1945, and so the title, kind of gender-neutral language, wasn't a part of a common language and understanding in 1945, so it's really a book that applies to everyone. But he wrote that book, he hired 3 secretaries, and he dictated his experiences in the concentration camp in this book. And it's a very powerful book, but he talks about 3 things that I think are really important for us to remember. The first is this, that there's 3 paths and truths to get through the difficult circumstances that life throws at us, because we all go through seasons of despondency and despair. The first is this, he said, creating a work or doing a deed. This is the path of achievement. It's the path of accomplishment. Your accomplishment could be work. Your accomplishment could be something significant that you're working toward, like maybe a degree, or maybe establishing a deeper connection with other people. Or it could be a service project that you're involved in. You're helping maybe disenfranchised people kind of get a leg up on life, and helping them through that. So people need to figure out the work or the deed that their life is about. And that's what he did. Even in the concentration camp, his mission became helping other people, and that helped him get through it. The second thing is this, we have to ascribe value to our experiences. And that's what's really important. When we ascribe value to our circumstances, we're able to find meaning and purpose in them. So you can ascribe value to your circumstances by leaning into the relationships that are important in your life. It could be family, it could be friends, it could be colleagues, it could be a number of different people, but relationships is a key factor. Nature can be something that ascribes value to your experiences. There was one prisoner that he noted in his book where she became so overwhelmed, but what was helpful to her was to have conversations with a tree. There was one tree on the camp. It was positioned through a seam in the slats of wood in the hut in which she stayed, but she had conversations with that tree because for her, it was the only sign of life in the midst of the carnage and death that was surrounding her every single day. So nature could be a thing. Religion, faith, spirituality, that could be a thing that ascribes value to your experiences that you can cling to help endure. And the third thing is this, what is your attitude towards suffering? We all face it. There's no one who's exempt from the stressors of life. But he talks about how life has meaning in all circumstances. No matter what it is, no matter what you're facing, you can ascribe meaning to something and find meaning through your suffering and be encouraged by it eventually. Because despair sets in when people suffer without purpose. So you have to have a purpose. You have to have a meaning that you ascribe to even the darkest periods of your life. So think of whom or what makes life worth living. What is that? What drives you? What motivates you? What kind of causes you to get up in the morning? Because no one is indispensable, but everyone is irreplaceable. Thanks so much.